Okay, this lesson is part 3, Biblical Hebrew, the perfect state in the singular and plural forms of that and the 7 stems. And this is part 3. In the first part, we built the grid, literally. We wrote what we can know that's not Hebrew, our English words that we memorized, the simple, active, and passive, the intensive, active, passive, reflexive, which this is in the intensive is alone where we have 3 forms. And then we have the causal, active, and causal, passive. So I wrote the simple in blue, intensive in red, causal in green. We notice cal, pl, and pual prior to punctuation look exactly alike because there is no prefix in those. We then went back, and as we're building our chart, I called your attention to the noon, that once you place that, that's just one letter that we prefix, and that is the indicator of the nifal. And again, the endings were all the same: hey, tav, 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 and then the yod, and then the vav, and then as it was pronounced, ah, ta, ti, u, tim, just as in Timothy, Timothy, just like the word Tim, and then tin, like a tin cup, and then new, just like we'd say a new car. So ah, ta, ti, u, tim, tin, new. Well, we noticed that repeated through each one. Ah, ta, ti, that's a half sound actually. We haven't punctuated, but that's how you'll pronounce it. T, like tee it up, a long sound there. T, u, tim, tin. So we have tim and tin, new. Ah, ta, ti, u, tim, tin, new. Ah, ta, ti, u, tim, tin, new. Ah, ta, ti, it's just a half sound. T, u, tim, tin, new. Now, having my accent not by accident, it was a product of a lot of people around me who made sounds that I now echo. So if I'm pronouncing anything that you dislike, you pronounce it any way you want. So here, in the causal stems, I went ahead and wrote the root word down and placed the hey, the H, which is the sign of the hifil, the causal. Remember, the noon is the sign of the simple passive. The hey is the sign of the causal. Hith is the sign of the reflexive. This hey, tav, or tau, and that is a very easy indicator. Learning that, you'll learn to appreciate these, just as we do the top row. The nifal, the key for us is the in, the noon in Hebrew. The hith file is this hith in English, but this hey, tav in Hebrew. So let's go ahead and write the hey here, and it's just a straight line, and you come across the top. Now it doesn't connect. Now sometimes when you're writing, you can make that error, and it won't be intentional. But so we come all the way down, all the way down, all the way down. There. Now that's how we are approaching the completion of the initial prior to punctuation, so that as our teacher instructed us, let's not confuse these things that are constant as consonants, for example, are, and then we will view our vowels, as I like to consider them, variables, because they're very dynamic. And as we go through using Hebrew, you'll learn about things that assimilate. We'll learn how does it indicate and help us through its inflections for grammar, because we use the vowel pointings for grammar, not for phonetics. Even though Hebrew is phonetic, it is numeric, and it is pictographic. We're here to analyze and use it analytically. So enough of that. I certainly don't like to bore myself, much more those that have to read this. But it's interesting when you get to where you can build these charts. I mean, it's been, to actually stand on a board, I don't often get to do that. I had one that was the very small one that I would use like a laptop. I could hold it and write. I used spiral notebooks for a long time, but now I have I need a lot of repetition. For me, I'm someone that has to do something 100 times to learn it, where someone else might do it just a couple of times or a few times and they grasp it. The difference sometimes is that if you have to do it several times, if you're willing to, you will learn it where someone who's unwilling to do it a few times won't learn it at all. So don't be discouraged if you have to do this several times, or be glad when you find out that maybe you are able to grasp this quite quickly. That's why I'm trying to use the colors and the patterns so that it'll be easier for you to notice. So in the blue, that's simple, active, passive. Red, intensive, active, passive, reflexive here. And then we have the causative, active, and passive. Now we have this, and now we can come and put our endings on it that match everything else thus far. So what we do know is still the same. We're not going to let what we don't know, which is the punctuation. We don't know that yet, but we're not going to let it throw us from what we do know. So we can see that thus far we've learned ah, ta, ti, ti, u, tim, tin, nu. And we've noticed how gracious it is of this standard, this pattern, that these are consistent. And we can see that. We're noticed now that it's an advantage to notice the N here because it tells us to place the noon there. So now that is a sign of the simple passive, simple active, simple passive. And we have no punctuation in the intensive, but we're relieved that these two are exactly like the simple active because we haven't punctuated. The punctuation alone is what distinguishes these. Now we're happy that we have hith here because it tells us to put hey, tav there. So now we can write that, then go and plug in and reinforce our learning. Ah, ta, ti, ti, u, tim, tin, nu. Now we can do the same thing here. Using green, we can write our ah, ta, there we go, clean that up, ti, ti. Now that is a vowel. I only placed it of necessity because the yod and that go together. So that's just me doing that because I already know that. But you'll pick that up. Some of you have already studied this before. We're just going back and I'm doing it more formally. And I'll be including a PDF in the future of the actual test and assignments and exercises that I took in the seminary that were designed through a lot of labor and hard work by Dr. Randy Murray. So you can really enjoy that and appreciate the advantage you'll have with that material. So here's 10 and then here's new. See here? There we go. Now, same thing here, blank, and aren't you glad? So the top row all the way across, we don't have any ending to know and to learn or memorize. So here we have ah, ta, and pronouncing it will help you remember it, iterate it, practice it, ta, ti, and then this long sound, t. Oh, I didn't write that correctly. Got to come across there a little bit. There we go. There we go. There we go. Ooh. Now, some people might not find this necessary. It's okay. This is for those of you who are studying it. Remember, your noon is subscript here. And then we have the standard form, new, and then the verb. So, ah, ta, ti, there we go. Ah, ta, ti, ti, u, tim, tin, nu. Now, that's quite a bit now. You look at the board and you're like, well, we began and it seems so simple because we just wrote the grid first. Write your squares, your matrix, your grid, however you want to describe it. And then we wrote our singular, our plural. We wrote our third feminine, third masculine, second feminine, second masculine. So we have 3, 2, 1, just like first, second, third person. We have 3, 2, 1, first, second, third person. You notice we only have 4 here because we have 2 common. First and third are common here. Now that's good because it means we have less to learn. Then we can write distinguish with color, simple, intensive, causal stems, active, passive, active, passive, active, passive, reflexive. Notice, remind these 3 columns Cal, PL, and PUAL, we noticed prior to punctuation they look exactly the same. We noticed the N in the term title NIPAL calls for the noon at the beginning, prefix it. Hith, good news, up here it tells us to place hey, tav here at the beginning, and then the causal stems tell us to place hey at the beginning, and then we can see that. So that's good news. That should help relieve some of the stress because if you were to look at this chart initially, see all of it at once, you couldn't see it all at once. So have a blessed day, and let's move on to part 4.